Welcome to Asian Vision Dialogue. I'm Sreynou, the host of our program today. Ladies and gentlemen, since 2014, the tension between Russia and Ukraine has been at the spotlight of the state affairs. And the crisis has reached its peak when Russia launched a full-scale military invasion of Ukraine on 24 February this year. And today I am with our honorable guest speaker, Dr. Kimlong, the Vice President of the Asian Vision Institute, AVI, and Mr. Socheat. He's the Senior Research Fellow who are going to share with us their perspective on our today's topic, which is about the analysis of the Russia-Ukraine crisis. So please join me to welcome our guest speaker. Greetings, Dr. Kimlong and Mr. Socheat. It's my great pleasure to have you today with us, and thanks for taking time from your busy schedule joining us today. So without further ado, I would like to pose some questions with regard to our topic today, and I believe that it's going to be a great discussion during our dialogue. So first, I would like to pose the first question to Mr. Socheat before we going further to the current situation of the conflict states between the former Soviet states and also with the other international actors. We would like to know a little bit about the underlying causes of the tension, the ongoing tension between Russia and Ukraine. And we want to know what are the reasons and rationale that push Russia to invade Ukraine.
Thank you very much, Sreynou, for your invitation and your question. Before we go deeper into the situation, I would like to bring all of us together to see what was the root cause. And everything started with the color revolution, which occurred in some Soviet Union republic, and I would say most of them, especially in Georgia, that started in early 2000, and later on it moved to Ukraine in 2004, during which President Viktor Yanukovych, who was the president during the 2004, there was a protest against him. And as we know, President Viktor Yanukovych was the pro-Russian president. And the people of the Ukraine want to see the regime change. So they made a very long. During the protest, although there were nobody were killed, but the president decided to leave his office and the election took place. However, his opposition got the power, that was Mr. Yushchenko, and he started to rule the country. And his tendency, his foreign policy was westward, which means that he's focused to have his relation closer to Europe rather than Russia. And in 2010, President Viktor Yanukovych was re-elected. And as we know, he was a pro-Russian president. And he ruled the country for 4 years. Unfortunately, in early 2014, there was another protest against him. And this time, Russian government sent their police to help, but could not stop the protest. And during the protest, there were more than 100 people killed. So the president decided to resign, and the election took place again before the mandate. We could see that the change of the political atmosphere came because of the people of the country itself. I mean, Ukrainian people themselves. They want to have a better government. They would love to have the government which is more like European countries' government. So there would always been in that situation from time to time. We could see from the election, we had a new president. His name was Poroshenko, and he was elected in May 2014. When he started to rule the country, he promoted the Ukrainian language and also nationalism. Along with that, in 2018, he decided to separate the church from the Russian Orthodox to Ukraine Orthodox. So the people of Ukraine started to have the separatism amongst themselves. For one part, they are on the Russian side, and the other part, they are on European side. So it made the situation worse. And when President Zelensky took power in 2019, he was like his previous president, Mr. Poroshenko. So his foreign policy was worse. He moved his country foreign policy toward European, and he also expressed his wishes to join NATO and European Union. That was part of the history that we could observe. And for the reason that pushed Russia to invade Ukraine, I would say there are four main root causes. The first root cause was the expansion of NATO and EU. As we know that NATO is the security alliance, while European Union is the economic alliance. And both of these institutions came together in order to persuade Ukraine into parts of it. In 2008, during the NATO summit in Bucharest, in Romania, NATO country, during the summit, they opened they opened the membership for Ukraine and also Georgia. That's why Ukraine see this opportunity and wanted to join NATO from that. And another one, we could see that there's the rise of separatists. And what happened in Ukraine today also resulted from the separatists in Donetsk and Luhansk, right? As I remember. So they started fighting against their own government in order to separate, to have their own republics. This is the second cause that pushed Russia to invade Ukraine, because Russia had the reason why they moved to these two regions, I mean Donetsk and Luhansk. And the third reason was the Ukraine foreign policy itself. We can see that President Zelensky was very close with the West, especially the United States. And before Russia invasion, we could see that he had a trip to Washington, D.C., where he had the agreement with the U.S. president. And the agreement would push, would allow the U.S. to help the facility, especially the military facility in Ukraine, and also provide some training for the armed force of Ukraine. And also the support of arms and other weapons to Ukraine. For this reason, Russia, I would say, could not keep itself calm. Instead of doing that, it started to invade Ukraine. The last reason that I could see is that, you know, there's an opportunity for Russia. Well, the United States was very occupied. It's very occupied with China, and it also had the issue of withdrawal its military personnel from Afghanistan. So Russia would, I think that Russia may feel that the US may not want to put its military outside of its country again. So with this opportunity, Russia decided to invade Ukraine. Thank you very much for your question.
Well, thank you, Mr. Socheat, for your comprehensive explanation. So let's move on to the next question. I would give the floor to Dr. Kimlong with regard to the viewpoint from the world. Like each and every country has been attempting to restore and bolster the economic growth. But when it's come to Russia-Ukraine crisis, I would like to know what does it mean for the global economy, and could you kindly share with us like the economic impact from this crisis, and which countries or region that consider being more vulnerable to this? Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think no one wants war, and the war is always destructive. And we have seen the devastating impacts of the war so far. From the world, economic impact, that it has been shattering, and the impacts have been reverberating across many channels, including the commodity prices and the consumer prices. We have seen Russia is one of the largest producers and suppliers of oil and gases, as we have seen. And apart from that, Russia also supplies wheat to the region, to the Middle East, to Europe, and to the other part of the world. As we have seen that Russians' wheat is very popular to support the beer industry and also the other food production for human being and for animal. And the third products that we have seen, which also impact the global economy, is the supply of metal products, including nickel, including coals, because Russia is also one of the biggest producers and suppliers of coal. Not only for countries in the Middle East, in the eastern part of Europe, but they supply coal to Africa, to Latin America, and to the larger part of the world. From that, we can see that the impacts of the war has been immense. Immense not because of the fact that Russia is not able to produce, but because Russia is not able to operate its economy normally as before, due to the fact that the world, particularly the West and the United States, have imposed sanctions on Russia in many forms, including through the financial transactions. Many Russian banks have been banned from operating internationally. That impacts that flow of trade, including commodities, service trade, whatever. When Russian economy cannot operate, which that has been translated into the inability of private businesses that have been operating in Russia, or those businesses that have been operating by Russian investors in other parts of the world. The impacts through that sanction has been felt not only by Russian economies, but also by countries that have been working or collaborating economically with Russia. The second impacts that we have seen, I think many people have seen those since the first day of the full-scale military attack by Russia in Ukraine, is the increase in the prices of oil and gases. Suddenly, Europe particularly relied largely on the importation of oil and gases from Russia, and you can see that about 90% of European countries and 90% of them is not that. If we look at that, we have to look at the micro level, which is the household level. 90% of households, on average in Europe, rely on gas from supplied by Russia. And we have seen over the past 3 weeks or 4 weeks, the price of gases, consumed by household in many parts in Russia, in Europe, increased by about 30% from 30 to 60%. And for the third part of the impacts that I touched on earlier is the impact on supply of coal, because coal is used for generating electricity, and many countries still rely on coal, including Cambodia, despite the fact that Cambodia is transitioning toward more clean and renewable energy. But many parts in the world still rely on coals that has been supplied by Russia. Second, in the third component is about the fact that prices of metal products, including nickel, steel, have also increased because coal has been used to generate electricity. When the energy sector has been impacted, has been halted by the fact that the sanction and also the inability of Russia to supply to the world kick in, we see that the price of those products increased dramatically. Nickel is very important for medical industry. It's very important for car and aircraft industry, for instance. And to conclude all of these impacts, the impact has been so immense. But which country has bear the most brunt? We can see Ukrainian economy has been estimated to decline by about 45%. And the latest report by the World Bank that just released about 11 days ago, it was released on the 10th of April this month, showed that besides the fact that Russian economy has declined about 45%, but until now maybe it could be more than that, because the duration and the intensity of the attack by Russia endlessly so far has been shattering the Ukrainian economy. The Russian economy has declined by about 12%, and the economy in the Middle East and also in Europe as a whole has been affected. At least about 30% of the economic activities has been affected, and not only that, if we look at Asia, Southeast Asia, if we look at America, if we look at the other part of the world, to conclude the overall impacts of the current ongoing war against Ukraine by Russia, we see that these impacts will continue to transcend into many other factors, other sectors, including human resource development, we call it human capital, or the human development as a whole with regard to education. A lot of students in Ukraine cannot go to school. A lot of small businesses cannot operate usually. And then the second thing is those who rely on temporary employment in Russia or in Ukraine, they have to leave the country, or they have to find jobs elsewhere from this country. So it affects the remittances. So some 30% of remittances that have been, transferring from Russia and Ukraine for the temporary or immigrant workers working in those countries now have also been affected. But in general, I think the impacts can be estimated and recalculated and more widely.
Well, thank you, Dr. Kimlong, for your insightful sharing and comprehensive discussion. With regard to another question, I would like to pose a question to Mr. Socheat, followed by Dr. Kimlong. We know that within the context in which people value norms and peace, and view military invasion and aggression as an unacceptable norms and action. So I would like to know whether what do Russian view the Russian invasion? What's their mindset? Yes.
All right, thank you very much, Sreynou, for your question. In fact, there was surveys conducted by different institutions. Among them, there were Levada, which is a center very famous in Russia, and there was also FOM, which is also located in Russia, and there was also from Washington Post that they also conduct a survey, and the result of the survey was not very different, ranging from 58% to 68%. That the people of Russia support the invasion of the government, and around 20 to 30% of them are against this invasion.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah. So how about the other international actors? I'd like to know what were their reactions, especially from the NATO members.
Most of the NATO members are consistent in terms of their sanctions on Russia, but a couple of NATO member countries changed their strategies in how the sanction should be applied. So rather than imposing the total sanctions like other big NATO member countries, a few NATO member countries decided not to include the parts of the supply of oil and gas by Russia, because for national interest, particularly for the welfare of the people and for the health of the economy, which rely largely on the use of gas and oil from Russia. So the sanction is one, on the part of the economic sanctions with regard to the financial sectors, through financial and banking sectors. But still, some NATO member countries, because their economy rely on Russians, the importation of oil and gas from Russia, and they cannot stop relying on this in a short period of time. So a number of them, while consistently echoing the momentum for the sanction on Russia, they would allow goods and services or the normalization of trade with Russia. And apart from the sanction by NATO, we have seen that some ally members of the NATO's and also ally members of other superpowers, including the US, have also tried to impose a number of other sanctions, including the restriction or the visa restriction for Russian businesses or Russian-related businesses. And in this way, in short, sanction would not serve the interest of either the NATO member countries or the interest of any countries in the world. So sanctions should not be applied, but what should be ended as soon as possible is the aggression, is the act of hostilities by Russia in Ukraine, because that impact lives, many civilian lives in Ukraine, and also it posed severe, grave consequences on humanity, particularly on the humanitarian crisis, as a lot of Ukrainian refugees have fled the country, and this leads to the international community's effort to bring total peace to Ukraine as soon as possible. And then with regard to the ending of the war in Ukraine, there will come other efforts by many international governments and also the international community as a whole to reconstruct and rehabilitate the country.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Kimlong. So another question I would like to turn to Mr. Socheat. Following the invasion of Russia, so we have got the update from other NATO members, especially on Finland and Sweden, that they are currently want to join NATO. So from this reaction of both European states, so do you think that their decision would be likely to escalate the tension or vice versa?
Well, thank you. It is more likely to provoke the escalation or the tension, I would say, to provoke the tension between Russia and NATO directly. Not only between Russia and Ukraine, because Russia already invaded Ukraine, and now when we look at the position of NATO itself, I think it is now in a very difficult position whether to accept or approve the membership for Finland and Sweden. Let's say, for Sweden, I would say it would be less tension between Russia and NATO, because Sweden does not share border with Russia, and it does not have any previous provocation between the two countries. I mean, the relation between Sweden and Russia was not that bad. However, for Finland, we know that it shares border with Russia more than 1,300 kilometers. And in this point, it is more like Ukraine, which share border with Russia. So it is the red line between Russia and NATO. So if NATO decided to take Finland as its member, then my assumption is that there would be direct confrontation between them.
Thank you, Mr. Socheat. So our last question would go to Dr. Kimlong. Dr. Kimlong, within the context that the war is still ongoing, and we know that the roles of international actors, especially the United Nations, are in great need. So from an economic perspective, what would be your suggestion for small states like Cambodia to support the international roles?
Thank you. I think small states and big states alike are very important in the peace building process, in peace making, and also the post-conflict reconstruction and rehabilitation stage. Cambodia was suffering decades long of a civil war, and we just achieved total peace in late 1998. So very recently, but the lesson that Cambodia learned can be a good lesson for other war-torn countries. Cambodia can continue to play an active role in the international community within the UN framework. under the framework of the UN Charter and the international rules and norms to provide humanitarian support. Cambodia can also meditate. Not only Cambodia, but I refer to small states. Cambodia is a small state. Small states and big states should be working together to bring an end, to bring war to an end, and then start the reconstruction process. But before that, mediation between the two parties in conflict is very important. And the small states like Cambodia can also be mobilized and then to provide a voice to the international community. They can join hands and forces with the international community, with the United Nations, with middle powers or the superpowers to ensure that international norms will be practiced, particularly in the context of the Ukrainian war we are seeing today. And for the international community, for the United Nations, for the major economies in the world, they should prevent the war as much as possible, but they should contribute to the reconstruction of the Ukrainian economy, of the Ukrainian society, in a way that the humanitarian crisis we have seen so far result that such as the casualties, the unnecessary death, and also the separation of families, parents, children in Ukraine we have seen so far. Those are what that they need the most. Small states like Cambodia can mobilize, synergy, can galvanize collective efforts to express our strong voice for peace. And peace for Ukraine means peace for the world. Peace for any country is peace for the region of that country and peace for the world. And when it comes to global solidarity, small states should work with big states to build trust, to promote mutual trust, with the trust that they can work together. And then politics aside, by putting politics aside or putting differences aside, that we can see peace in Ukraine.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Kimlong. So now I think due to the time constraints, we coming to the end of our dialogue. So once again, I would like to express my appreciation to our speakers, Dr. Kimlong and Mr. Socheat, for taking time joining us today. Ladies and gentlemen, so our Asian Vision dialogue has now come to an end. Thank you for always being with us, and please stay tuned for our next episode. See you in the next episode.